Okay, we'll get started. Thank you. There's a couple of people coming in. So it's a pleasure to see you all here, and I'm delighted to moderate this last panel of the day, which is Clark Geography in and for Worcester. And I'm going to introduce the guest speakers, and then we'll go through their presentations. And at the end of all of the presentations, we'll have time for questions, and we'll hand the microphone around. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Deborah Martin, who's a professor in geography at Clark. And she's been here since 2004 and was the previous director of the GSG from 2017 to 2020. And her research interests include place identity, local politics, legal geography, qualitative methodologies, and social movements, particularly around neighbourhood activism. And with me, I'm honoured to always work with Deb, co-leads Clark's HERO programme, Human Environment Regional Observatory, and you'll hear quite a bit about that today. And so welcome, Deb. Next is Sarah Hughes, who's an undergraduate student in the Environmental Science programme at Clark, and she'll graduate in May from Environmental Science with high honours, based on a research project on the Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary, which you'll talk about, which is also with the HERO programme. And we'll begin the MS-GIS, the Masters in GI Science programme, this summer. And Sarah is an active member of the Clark University Outing Club and has led many hikes in the area, and is also active at the Clark's Hadwen Arboretum. Thirdly, I'm delighted to have Nicolas Malizia back to Clark. I've known Nick for a long time. And Nick received his BA in Geography in 2005, his MS in GIS in 2006, and his Ph.D. in Geography from Arizona State University in 2013. He's the Senior Director with the Technology team at Indigo Agriculture and leads the Remote Sensing Group. And Nick was one of the earliest fellows in the HERO programme when it started back in, over 20 years ago. Thirdly, Madeline Regs Regenye received her degree in environmental science in 2022 with high honours, and is about to complete her Masters in GI Science in May. Sadly to see you maybe leaving. And Regs is a former HERO fellow and is a current HERO graduate student manager. She's a member of Clark University's women's rowing team and has also been actively engaged as a volunteer in the Hadwen Arboretum. So join me please in welcoming this esteemed group.
Okay, let's see. Can you hear me okay with the microphone? Okay, see if I can adjust here. All right, thank you, John. I'm honored to be on this panel because much of the work that I think everybody is going to talk about is really all about students doing work in the community. So I'm going to start just talking about the work I've done with John Rogan. And I know your programs say that HERO started in 2003, but John and I think it started in 1999. And I want to give a kudos to David Angel and Billy Turner for having the imagination and creativity to realize this program. And I also want to point out the tremendous number of undergraduate students have been mentored. We do not have the number of PhD student and master's students who have also acted as mentors and have learned in sort of an intergenerational, multi-generational program. I also want to point out, I think you can see at the bottom of the slide, that the funding is provided by the John T. O'Connor 78 Fund. If it were not for this fund, this program wouldn't exist. It enables us to pay undergraduates to do research with us in the summer, and it really makes the program possible. We've done a lot of work in HERO. HERO has mostly focused on Massachusetts since its origination, and I think in 1999 it really focused on land cover change. John and I started working together in 2011, 2012 with National Science Foundation funding for 3 years, looking at the longhorn beetle infestation in Worcester. And so what most of my talk, because of the title of this session, is really focused on work that's being done in and for Worcester. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the longhorn beetle. Then the program really focused on Massachusetts more broadly and looking at the state program called Greening the Gateway Cities, where we've looked at a number of cities and towns in Massachusetts. And the Greening the Gateway Cities program is actually coming to Worcester, and so we'll be able to both study the program and be in Worcester at the same time. But in 2020 and 2021, John really did the pivot, the COVID pivot, and enabled Hero to continue functioning with outdoor-only work and work on computers and on Zoom that was really focused on Worcester, the Hadwen Arboretum, and then also focusing on some of Worcester's green plan. The way we've done Hero is that we introduce students to both social science, qualitative social science work, and biophysical work. And so that's sort of a hallmark of what we do is the students are doing site assessments. They're looking at tree health, but they're also looking at the local conditions of trees. Usually these are newly planted trees, but not always. And with some of the work in Worcester, also looking at environmental conditions. So you can see some of the kinds of things that students look at and measure and we collect data on. And then we also have kind of a social science focus, which is sort of my side of things. We interview people, we talk to stakeholders who are involved in environmental resource programs, again, usually tree planting, but not always. And we have some frameworks that we draw from other work in environmental resource management, which are about how do people understand the policies, how are they part of implementing policies, what are the resources for the policies, and what are the discourses. The questions at the bottom are just some example of questions we've asked people who have had trees planted on their property as part of the Greening the Gateway Cities program. But to come back to Worcester and how we kind of got started and work on Worcester, it was the longhorn beetle infestation that was discovered in 2008, led to a tremendous amount of cutting down of trees because the way the federal Department of Agriculture deals with these kinds of problems is to cut down the trees that have the invasive species and also cut down the trees around the trees that are infected so that you prevent the spread of the beetle. So in Worcester, over 30,000 trees were cut down, and this focused mostly in Burncoat and Greendale neighborhoods. And you can see in this, the satellite imagery here, the 2000, or aerial photography, the 2008 when there were lots of trees, and then a lot of trees were cut, and then the analysis in the final picture there is showing the loss in tree canopy, where some areas in green where there was no change. So that's kind of the beginning foundation of the work that we started doing, which was to see what was the impact. So you can see in the left-hand side with the pictures that the impact was that the landscape changed dramatically. And that also had a number of other kinds of effects. The bottom picture, though, there's the hopeful tree planting side of it, is that the DCR and also a newly formed organization called the Worcester Tree Initiative, as well as the City of Worcester, did a lot of tree planting. And in fact, the planting that was done by the DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, sorry about that, actually formed some of the model of the program that was then rolled out statewide, which we have continued to study, which is the Greening the Gateway Cities program. But another thing that we found, so this particular, the map on the right is looking at temperature change, and we found that the areas that are in red and orange have increased temperature. You could see that this did not affect only Worcester. Worcester was one of 5 cities and towns that were affected by the longhorn beetle infestation and that are part of what's called the quarantine zone, which does still exist. And the beetle has not been eradicated officially from Worcester, so as far as we know, it may still lurk. But the other thing that we found, and this map shows a little bit, is that while tree felling because of an invasive beetle was a significant source of tree loss in Worcester between 2008 and 2010, we also found that by far the most significant loss of trees in the area was because of just urban development as regular, as is practiced. And so there's a number of sites where you can see the trees were lost, and there's orange and red on the map, but they were actually due to either some timber logging or ice storm damage. There's a big ice storm in 2008 here, but also significantly due to urban development. Looking at the impacts, we have focused a lot on temperature because of climate change and because of impacts on people's quality of life. And just the thing to note here is that taking down trees results in an increase in temperature, but where it really results in an increase in temperature is where the trees were covering impervious surfaces. So impervious surfaces are really, the major driver, and trees providing shade over impervious surfaces is a major mitigator of urban heat. So a lot of what happened in Worcester did inform this program that the Department of Conservation and Recreation statewide created a Greening the Gateway Cities program. It's a fascinating program. It involves everyday citizens who have trees planted on their property by the DCR, taking care of those trees. It involves community groups. It's fascinating. I can't tell you more about it because I don't have time. But just to say that we've done a lot of work there, but I'm not going to tell you about it because I want to talk more about Worcester, because that is, sort of the focus today. And so I feel a little like this is unfair to John because a lot of this work John really led, not me. I was actually on sabbatical for a big chunk of it, but I'm here representing it because John's our moderator. But very important to understand the context, which is that the city of Worcester is trying to do work around climate mitigation and climate change and have more resilience as an urban city to climate change. And lots of work being done around public health and heat. And so one of the areas of focus was on heat and vulnerability to heat. So I want to show a couple of different things. I'm not going to answer these questions. I just put them here to tell you these were the overall research context for the summer of 2020 and 2021. I think most of this work was done in 2021, and Regs and Sarah might actually talk more about it. There is a focus on environmental justice. The state of Massachusetts has an environmental justice definition, which has to do with households that are isolated in terms of English language ability. So any area that has more than 25% of households with no members of the family over age 14 who speak English at an ability level that they define as very well. That is one dimension of environmental justice. Another is median household income that's less than 65% of the statewide median. And another is households that identify as non-white. So what you can see on this map is that the blue areas, or I believe they look blue to you, maybe purple, are where all three of these measures are coexisting in those neighborhoods. And it's central Worcester. You can kind of see almost trace Main Street as part of that, as well as downtown. What we look at then is how are these neighborhoods affected as compared to the city as a whole around temperature, temperature intensity in the summer. And the thing to note basically is that it's not the morning temperatures, it's not even the afternoon temperatures, it's the nighttime temperatures, because areas with a lot of impervious surface don't cool down. And so you can see that in a different way. Here looking at environmental justice factors, income, non-white and English, each separately, and then the neighborhoods with none of these environmental justice dimensions. And you can see afternoon looks kind of the same across the city. What's the big deal? But then you switch to evening and you can see what the big deal is. Actually a 5-degree Fahrenheit difference between the no environmental justice risk neighborhoods and the environmental justice risk neighborhoods, particularly English isolation, which is newer immigrants. You can also see that in terms of tree canopy distribution, where areas with English isolation actually have the least experience of tree canopy in their neighborhoods. Last 2 points, I think, is just what we've learned. I have these 2 slides up just to say students participate in data collection, data analysis, and often sometimes data write-up. There's a number of ways that students engage with stakeholders, learn about how to do community-engaged science, and that also produce that science. And so all but 2 of the articles listed here were lead authored by undergraduate students, or students who were undergraduates when they did this work. Same with the tree planting initiative work. There's a little bit more of Ph.D. student lead author represented here, but also some lead author undergraduates. And actually one of them was a master's student at UMass, which represents some of our collaboration with people at UMass Amherst. The HERO program engages undergraduate students in direct interaction, engagement, and presentation of research findings with stakeholders at the state and city level, and also engages them with the community groups who are involved in these policies. And I'll just put this last slide up. I know I've gone over time, I apologize, to recognize some of the people who have worked, supported this work and been involved most recently. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sarah. I've had the amazing opportunity to participate in the HARO program the past 2 summers doing geography research in Worcester, as well as conducting my own independent research at Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary, so in Worcester, which I'll be focusing on today. And here on this slide, you can see me along with other HARO fellows interviewing residents near Broadmeadow Brook and installing acoustic wildlife monitors. So just to start off, the Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary is an urban nature preserve in Worcester operated by Mass Audubon. It's a really amazing site, forest, wetlands, vital habitat for wildlife such as birds, native plants, even beavers, but it's also threatened by urbanization in Worcester, which contributes to forest loss, residential development, and especially pollution has really impacted these wetlands here. With the HARO program, we conducted a vegetation survey as well as a residential survey of the area. So the vegetation survey focused on a wetland transect in the Broadmeadow Brook, and the purpose of this was to look at what vegetation was there, both to see the biodiversity, the influence of native versus invasive plant species, and to help the Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary as they start a restoration project. The restoration project is one of the main reasons that drew me in and why I wanted to focus on Broadmeadow Brook for my honors thesis. What I love at Clark is you're doing research, especially in the geography department. I think that's really practical, pragmatic. It's what the research you're doing is directly helping people and organizations in Worcester, the environment in Worcester. It's not just research for research sake. So this vegetation survey could help them after the restoration project to see the effectiveness of it. As well, we completed a residential survey with the HARO program. We went to, this is 285 houses. Out of that, we conducted 55 interviews, which were 30 minutes to an hour in length, talking to the residents about their opinions on Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary, as well as their community and environmental issues at large. This was a really great experience for me, along with the other HARO fellows. Speaking in front of people, talking to people I didn't know is something I was pretty nervous about, and I gained so much confidence from that experience, as well as knowledge about Worcester and about the environment. Briefly, I'll go over some of the results of this residential survey. So as you can see on the chart on the left, perception of the sanctuary was overwhelmingly positive among nearby residents, though we also found some opportunities for improvement, especially in communication and community engagement, as well as providing materials and programs in different languages, such as Spanish. And on the right, the chart shows the environmental issues residents are most concerned about. Almost 96%, almost 100% of residents said they were concerned about environmental issues, particularly climate change and pollution. And again, this is feedback that we brought directly back to the Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary, and that they can use in their restoration project and generally to help make their site more effective for the community and engage with residents better. Switching it up a bit, I also did my honors thesis on the Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary. Here I really applied a geospatial analysis approach looking at land change across the past about 70 years from 1951 to 2018. And as you can see from this chart, well, first of all, my research questions were, how has forest and wetland land cover changed in quantity and spatial distribution? And how has urban and socioeconomic development impacted the structure and size of the Broadmeadow Brook wetland system? Overall, I found that there was a really large decrease in forest area, which was driven by the urbanization of Worcester, especially residential development to the east and along the boundaries. But there was also an expansion of the wetland during that time, which was a surprising result and something I was really happy to see. In the HARO program, we also did some analysis of past wetlands and flooding issues in Worcester, and we found that wetlands area in Worcester has decreased a lot throughout Worcester because of development, so this is something that's really great to see. Again, providing a lot of habitat, providing ecosystem services. Next slide. And here you can see these changes spatially. So the map on the left shows land change throughout that period. So you can see there's a lot of residential development to the east, a bit to the west as well. That picture shows an area that was previously open land and now is a large vehicle junkyard, for lack of a better term, which can, as you can imagine, can contribute pollution to the wetland system, as well as the residential development there. You can also see in the light blue and darker blue colors that wetland expansion. Then on the map on the other side, you can see persistence of land uses throughout the period, where you can actually see a lot of forest persistence in that period, but there is also a lot of forest loss. Generally, forest loss occurred outside the boundaries of the current sanctuary, whereas forest persistence in the sanctuary was really strong, which showed how important that development of the conservation of the sanctuary was, which occurred in 1989. As you can imagine, there could be a lot more development if that hadn't happened. And that was a community-led program to make that into a conservation area with activists from Worcester really leading that. I think that's all I have for you today, but I just wanted to talk a little about the research I've done in Worcester and how helpful it was for me, both developing my geospatial skills, developing my research skills, as well as getting to go out into the community and actually helping people, helping the environment, feeling like I made a real impact. And the HARO program was so instrumental in that, both in developing confidence, developing those research skills, then meeting people with similar interests, similar skills, getting mentors, both faculty, graduate students. It was amazing. And Regs will talk a little more about the HARO program. Oh.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. So Nick, Malizia, a couple weeks ago, John emailed me and said, hey, do you have your slides? And I was like, slides? John, it's been 20 years since I've done research in Worcester, so they haven't survived the however many computers I've had since then. But I did want to talk and weave sort of a narrative around what the HERO program and doing the research within the area of Worcester, or the community of Worcester and around Worcester has kind of meant to me and the lessons that it's taught me. And so I guess to start, I came to Clark, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to study, but I had an interest in the environment and I had basically a lifelong interest in maps. So I wound up taking a geography class with Billy Turner and really sucked me in. It was great. So we had compelling professors like Billy, and I think it was at the end of the semester he mentioned to me like, hey, I got this HERO program that we're running, and there's an opportunity this summer to do some research if you're interested. And I was like, I don't have a job lined up, so yeah, that sounds great. And so that was a door that it just kind of led me down like the rest of my path in my life in terms of my academic career and the research and the discipline. And so that was great. And ultimately, like, what it amounted to me doing that summer was waiting around in streams in and around Worcester and measuring stream flow and doing all sorts of field work, which was super interesting to me. And as a kid from the area was very valuable because I had grown up east of here, a town called Hudson. It's not too far. But I didn't know much about Worcester when I came to Clark. I knew where to find Kangaroo Crossing. I knew where the Tatnick Booksellers was, like a couple restaurants, and that was it. So Gil, who was running the program before John, having me run around in these streams and talk to people, like we wound up talking to the mayor about impervious surfaces and all this fun stuff, really opened my eyes to the community. And later on, my research focused more on like the quantitative side of things. And so doing like land change modeling with Gil and then some other work later on. But that grounding in like getting out in the community and like actually understanding it and not just like thinking it was super valuable to me. And actually, so I took a brief hiatus from Hero and went and worked one summer up at the Harvard Forest out in Petersham. And I worked for David Foster there. And he, basically, I wasn't exactly sure what I was gonna work on when I showed up. And he was like, you're gonna work on this, which was looking at the effect of alternative land conservation strategies. So like conservation easements and like that basically limit development that keep the land available for basically the environmental services it provides without having to get like an official designation from the state or whatever that it's protected. So at the start of the summer, he was like, get in your car and go drive around. Take a couple days, just go drive around. Like learn the towns, like visit some of these sites. And I was like, hey, this is great. Like you're paying me to drive around and go for hikes in the woods. This is awesome. So I did. Again, it was very valuable because I had actually never been to that part of the state before. So getting out and seeing it kind of grounded me in the area that I was looking at on a computer screen for the rest of the summer, and I knew what I was doing. And then fast forward to graduate school out in Arizona. Similar situation where I was working on a paper. My advisor had a grant with the Department of Justice looking at the distribution of crime throughout the Phoenix Metro, and he didn't tell me to go drive around and look at these places, but I did. And it was valuable because you can pump a bunch of census variables into a model and you can get all the the police statistics, et cetera, but that doesn't really paint a picture of the communities that are affected by these crimes. So he didn't tell me, but like through the work with Hero, through the work with Harvard Forest, it was just a lesson that I learned. And actually fast forward to today, where I work for an ag tech company and I lead the remote sensing team. First of all, let me back up. When I started in that space, I knew nothing about agriculture. I had actually worked on a farm when I was younger, but it was an apple orchard and it was around here. So I thought I knew a little bit. And then I made a point to basically go and visit some of the farms that we were working with and some of our customers, and both like the growers, but also like the grain buyers. And it was an incredibly valuable experience, again, driven home by this point. And so it's a thing that we still support today within my team that, most people don't know a lot about commercial agriculture. So when you're coming in, go out there, go visit the Midwest, go visit some of these farms. So yeah, I mean, that kind of all ties back to this and my experiences with Hero and just getting to know Worcester a bit more before I started crunching some numbers. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
starting off strong. So this is part of some of the work that I did with Hero. This one was 2021 summer. So we did the stuff. We did the field work. We went to the trees. We hugged them. Well, we measured their DBH. We hugged them, and we got their temperature. And then we started to look at those results and stuff like that. And then I went off and did a little bit of a separate remote sensing project. That was John had gotten the locations of 10 schools within Worcester that had their roofs painted white. And we're like, oh, this is interesting. Let's look at what happens when the roofs go from dark to white, or possibly white and then have solar panels added as well. So that's what this map on the left is showing. And this is, we called this our bitemporal land surface temperature change analysis, because we took 2 different dates before change. So like 2010, before all these schools had their roofs changed or treated, we call it like the white roof treatment. And then to 2020. And so that's what the graph on the right is showing. And basically we were able to come up with an equation that told us that for every 0.411 acres of roofs that were painted white and or installed with solar panels, the surface temperature would decrease by 1 degree Fahrenheit. So that to start off our information about this. So this is what it actually kind of looks like when we have like that treatment done. So this is actually a really large distribution center that's in like the south of Worcester. Very, very large, like 13 acres. And when looking at those pixels, we found that there was a decrease of 33 degrees Fahrenheit from 2010 to 2020. So that's what that little dot is at the bottom of the right graph. As you can see, it kind of like really brings together our line. So that's a crazy difference. And looking at the impervious surface around it and stuff like that, again, not a whole lot of trees, a lot of roads. So this is a highly commercial area. And then throwing in the context of what those areas in Worcester look like. So this now is part of my honors thesis, because I was, again, really intrigued by what these white roofs could do. And planting trees is great and all, but depending on how the buildings are, how dense they are, and the height of them, that's where we come into what are called local climate zones. So this is a designation that was made, and they actually created something called the local climate zone generator, where you throw in your training sites, and then you're able to get these different zones. So actually I have the map on the right is separated by the Worcester neighborhoods, and it actually aligns almost perfectly with the map that Deb showed earlier of all the environmental justice neighborhoods. And so all the red and the gray showing those denser commercial areas, all that stuff. So areas that would not have a lot of room for trees, that is where we have these compact and high-rise local climate zones. And so we have now the difference between them and the local climate zones. So we have the arrow is pointing to large low-rise, because we actually see the greatest difference of temperature between large low-rise, and this is done through zonal stats analysis that I ended up running. And I also ran a zonal stats analysis on building height using LiDAR data, which ended up not being that interesting, because it just kind of coincided with exactly what we knew, where the buildings were the tallest and the closest together and stuff like that. And Worcester also has our lovely triple deckers. So a lot of what we saw here actually with the orange, that's our triple deckers. That's our open mid-rise. It's a compact mid-rise. So it's interesting to look at the difference. So it's actually kind of separated right down the middle. On the left, we have what would be considered like urban and impervious surface. And then on the right is those considered natural. So these, again, are not exactly land cover. It takes into account of like the scattering of the area and just like the distribution of the natural to the urban. But we can see the temperature difference is a lot lower in the natural zones, which is to be expected again from all the previous research that we've done. And so it's actually really cool coming from being on the streets of Worcester. I'm going to go to this map because I like this one. Being on the streets of Worcester. So actually that neighborhood that's kind of shaped like a triangle, that's Green Island, right smack dab in the middle. It is one of the highest AEJ community neighborhoods. We walked around that. We got all the temperature measurements, and then coming back and applying some remote sensing to that was super cool, because then we could just come back. We actually, did you submit your thing to the Worcester City Council or no? Yours, yeah. So all of our honors thesis that had to do with Worcester from our year of 2021, we all ended up, so we did our big presentation for, what was it, the Sustainability Commission? They were the ones who wrote the green plan. And then we sent them this as well. And then they were like, oh, so you, because they were mostly interested in us planting trees. And they were like, oh, so white roofs is also a thing. And we're like, yeah, compound effects. So it's kind of cool then to go off into our separate groups and do our separate research and coming out with these results that have an impact on previous research that I've done and put into the context that we know from walking around in the streets, from talking to people, from interviewing people and stuff like that, and then going to the city of Worcester and telling them and relaying. And we try to give like little anecdotes and stuff like that. Was a really cool experience. And I'm still like looking at this work and like trying to improve it, making like control sites, stuff like that. But again, this is all stuff that like would not be possible if like we didn't sit in front of the computers after we had collected all of our data and say, okay, well, what does this mean? And like, what can we do next? And what questions can we answer? And it's always nice having our results, but then using those to come up with more questions, stuff like that. Yeah, so it's really, really cool thing to be a part of.
Thank you very much. So are there questions? And we have the microphone here. Do you remember Phil Donahue used to go up into the audience? Do anyone remember Donahue?
Cool. Thanks to all of you for the interesting information. I think in the description, it talks about working with public transit in Worcester. I was curious if we could get into that and how that intertwines with urban forestry, I guess.
It's Garrett.
Garen, yeah.
Garrett.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can represent the work so well, but there have been actually a number of students who have really wanted to do research on how to improve Worcester's public transportation, and most recently funded actually through the urban development, it's now called Urban Studies program. I believe Garen had an internship with the city where he was looking at, now I'm trying to remember exactly what the details of his project were. But does anybody?
I think it was bus routes.
It's network connectivity. Like
That's right.
making them more efficient.
Right, making bus routes more efficient. It's actually kind of interesting because the city, the public schools now has GPS on all their school buses, and which they didn't have until they took over their own system because they contracted it out. But the city of Worcester doesn't yet, I believe, have all of the routes where you can, see exactly where the bus is and when it's coming.
Yeah, they definitely don't.
So Garen was trying to encourage and push more GIS use and analysis so that the city system could be more connected and user-friendly. I don't know exactly what happened with that research. I know that he presented it at least once to the city of Worcester. Well, it's not the cities, it's the Worcester Regional Transit Authority. But I don't know what happened after that. Sorry, he's not here to represent himself.
There's a Clark Now story, you could probably Google it.
Yes, so Jim is saying there's a Clark Now story that you could get some more information about. Also in your bags, your swag bags, Nick's map of how to walk, where to go in Worcester. That's not the public transit routes, but places you can hike and how to get to green space. That was also an independent project that Nick was interested in. Like, I want to take GIS skills and do stuff with getting Clarkies off campus and into the city, and so created that map with both help from I think Yelena in IDCE for the vector mapping, GIS, and then also design from the Visual and Performing Arts Department. So there's been a number of kind of different ways that students post Susan Hansen retiring have figured out how to do work on transportation, even though we don't have any faculty expertise in transportation right now anymore. So.
Thank you, guys. First of all, I love hearing about your research. It's really, really great. I have a question about the White Roof Project. And if you could just help me understand, I'm having trouble understanding what you mean when you say if you reduce, the more you increase the white roof acreage, the temperature drops by X amount. The temperature of what? That's my question. Of an area, presumably, but how is that area defined?
So we did with our trees interesting, we referred to it as like a sensitivity analysis. So we did it at 30 meters, 60 meters, and 90 meters, like a buffer around like the tree area. So that kind of goes for saying like the building area. So it's it's overall the land surface temperature. So just the roof itself of the building.
It's the building itself?
Yeah.
Just the surface?
Yeah,
Okay, so
it's
you
not
put
how it feels. Yeah.
You're testing the temperature on the roof.
Yeah, so it's the change in albedo, yeah.
Okay, on the roof. That's all.
Yeah.
Not the surrounding area or anything else.
Yeah. We know from our tree sensitivity analysis that any reduction in temperature at like a pinpoint kind of has a general reduction in the surrounding area. Yeah. And it's hard to say by how much, but again, that's why we tried to measure it out by acres. Yeah.
It's very cool, yeah.
And just to add, if I may, so one of the things that means, if you think about the map I showed with the 3 different the temperature for all of Worcester, like morning, midday, and night, for impervious surfaces that absorb heat, then it's not just the temperature in that place, but then at night, the heat, when it's no longer absorbing the heat, it releases it out. So there is an ambient effect that we tried to look at with the trees in terms of, well, there's an effect, 30, 60, 90, was that meters or feet? I don't remember. Meters. And so it's an extrapolation that we're saying if we can reduce the roof temperature effect, it's not going to just affect that roof. It's going to affect the area because of what happens after the sun goes down at night in hot summer time.
Okay. Yeah. Just a general question about HERO. How is it that the research questions get generated?
A couple of different ways. So I'll speak for when John and I started working together because that's what I know. So in 2011, we wrote a grant for the National Science Foundation REU program, which is research experience, REU, yes, research experience for undergraduates. And that funded 3 years. So we had initial research questions that were about the impacts of the longhorn beetle infestation. So there were policy side questions and biophysical impact questions. So that first round, built into that program, which has continued with all of the HERO work that John and I have done, we have what we call stakeholder summits, where at the end of the summer, the students who go through a grueling, 4 to 6 weeks of data collection and data input, then have to have a very constrained amount of time in the summer to then analyze that data and come up with a presentation of findings, and then we present that to stakeholders. The students, as everyone here who isn't me on this panel did this in some way, shape, or form, then pursue their own research topics based on some of that data that was collected, as well as their interests the following year. But in those stakeholder summits, we're presenting to the people who helped us get the data in the first place, or who work on policy in those areas or who are interested residents, et cetera, business owners, community groups, and they ask us questions about what we present, and that often generates a new round of, oh, we should look into that, or let's try and incorporate that into data collection next summer or maybe another summer. So it's a very iterative process. John and I try to sort of do what academic researchers do and stay up on the literature and ask new questions based on the literature, but it's really about sort of community-informed and community-engaged research where we're trying to do things that help answer questions in the community or that are issues in the community, and then we get new questions from them that we try to build into subsequent rounds of research. So it's a long-term, iterative process. But so the research questions come from all of that.
I'm wondering the degree to which you've seen any policy change as a result of all these things. I know it's hard. It's really hard to change policy, but good mapping often helps. So I was wondering if you had been more successful.
I was curious. So the summer I stayed on sabbatical. John is far more dedicated than I am because I think whenever he takes sabbaticals, he still does heroes. But when I took my year-long sabbatical, I was like, I'm out I need my summer. But the summer that Regs and Sarah participated in trying to inform the Green Worcester plan, I believe, but I can't point, to exactly the place in the documentation, but they're trying to respond to some of this. Like they're really interested in this idea of, okay, in the neighborhoods where it's really hard to plant trees, like Green Island, maybe we can get more roofs painted white and or have more solar panels in areas where there's already impervious surface, because the solar panels will have the opposite effect because they absorb that energy. They don't send it back out, they send it to the grid, right? So that's great, that's a win-win-win. But the other, so I can't say as much about Worcester specifically in terms of response, and I feel like John might be chomping at the bit to say some things, but the Greening the Gateway Cities program, like that, we have a very clear collaborative with the State Department of Conservation and Recreation, and they're always interested in what we find. I'm not sure I would say that I can point to a direct policy impact, but there's a lot of back and forth about like, how do their foresters work in the community? What community groups do they work with? And also to what nurseries provide the trees that get planted? Because a couple of years we found that some of the foresters already knew this, but it wasn't reported back up. But when we first got involved and looked at the first round of planting in Worcester in response to all the tree cutting from the longhorn beetle, we presented to the foresters, and the people who had been involved in the planting were like, oh yeah, we know why all those, what was it, white fir, none of the white fir, or very few white fir trees that were planted survived. And they were like, yeah, they were in terrible condition. But it wasn't until we presented that the DCR knew it officially, even though all the foresters heard that and they're like, yeah, we knew that. But it didn't come back around. So now the idea of paying attention to who are your nurseries, what are you getting in terms of supply, and what's gonna, so I wouldn't say we've changed policy, but I think we've helped inform the conversations that the policymakers have.
Thanks. The sort of, this is more of a comment than a question, but following up on the white roofs and Heat Island thing, the city did a recent consultant study where they looked at that, and I'm not sure I entirely understood it because it's a little bit counterintuitive, but what the consultant reported was that in that situation like the one you showed, where you have, a building out in the open, no trees around, you give it a white roof or solar panels, and you're either reflecting it back out or absorbing it. But they also concluded that if you do white roofs in areas that have a certain amount of tree canopy, so the sunlight hits the roof, reflects off, but then it somehow gets trapped in the canopy and it doesn't have as much value. I'm not sure if they actually ground tested at that or it was just computer modeling, but I mention it because it would be an interesting thing to dig that up and integrate it with your work. And that was the comment.
Yeah, I mean, we like trees because of the other benefits they offer as well for the urban heat island effect. So another thing that we also measured, which might have been like in like the methods bubble that we had, was ozone. And then we also recently got an attachment to our little air quality reader that also read particulate matter. So it was interesting to see the particulate matter readings and stuff like that underneath trees, and see that like pollen and things like that weren't really affecting it. It was actually more of just like dust and cars and stuff driving by. So yeah, even if the effect, I guess, isn't as concentrated or nice when it's out in the open and stuff like that. And that's like kind of why the local climate zones are so cool, is like, so, okay, the open low rise, that's like where we target then for those white roofs. That's where we know that it's gonna have the biggest effect and stuff like that. But any benefit of heat reduction, no matter how small. And again, some analysis we've done, Sarah specifically did this, modeling out trees for like 30 years and their growth and stuff like that, which a lot of cool tools can do that for you. iTree Eco and stuff like that, just take a, little bit of working with and stuff like that, ends up with like less than a degree Fahrenheit of cooling out those 30 years later. But we also have some HERO students right now looking at how that affects people using their energy in their houses, how that affects people if you cut a tree outside of someone's house, then they suddenly start having to use their air conditioner more. It's cool to look at all the compound effects in the big picture and stuff like that, and just any decrease in temperature is great.
Thanks. I'll try to be brief, not like the last session I was in. So 3 things I wanted to say. First is beyond policy, the other thing I think folks should know, if you don't live in Worcester and you don't read the TNG, this program is in the news frequently. There's been a lot of stories about this program. Deb and John have been in these stories. The public is getting informed about what's going on around this, the tree situations, the longhorn beetle, what have you. And then Deb, with her Discover Worcester course, makes the paper. So this is the other part of it. It's a public information channel that's really significant in that regard. And it's obviously hard to qualify or quantify the exact benefits of that, but I just think that's a hugely important thing for the community as well as for Clark and alike. The second thing is I've witnessed this, okay? I have had an office diagonally across the hall from my best friend in the department, Sean Rogan, one of my best friends in the department, and I get to watch this. I get to watch what he does, and Deb too. Just, he doesn't live in a panopticon, but I do watch. I do observe his actions. And it's just an incredible amount of effort and labor and time and care and devotion to this project, and to the city of Worcester and the city of Worcester's environment. And so I think, for folks who don't really see how the sausage is made here, it's pretty remarkable. And this is not something that has to be done. He doesn't need to do this to get a salary. He doesn't need to do this to maintain his tenure or promotion, or Deb too. This is a labor of love. And in that regard, is there any way you can show the website about the Hadwen Arboretum and we can just show people what you've been doing there? Because that is a project. I've been there with you carrying 5-gallon bottles of water so you can put water in tree seedlings because there's a drought up and down the hill because there's no running water there. So I'll go up and put the website on. The website's amazing. If folks haven't seen the website for the Hadwen Arboretum at Clark University, it's pretty remarkable. So anyway, come on.
Yeah, so the students deserve the credit for all of it. So they're pushed very hard, would you say? Would you agree with that? You do a lot of work, and it can be, these things, so publishable quality projects are difficult to arrive at, especially if you're an undergrad. I think that's probably the easiest thing for you to agree with of what you've heard today. So that's really tough. And Gil deserves, where's Gil? Gil is here. Gil deserves an enormous amount of credit, as Nick knows. We're spending our summers, so are the students, and particularly during the first outbreak of COVID, when students had to go to Zoom, and then their lives were on Zoom, we had a very difficult year. And Nick, as well, I want to point out Nick Duran here, who, as a PhD student, and also with Mark Healy and others in the past, have made these things happen. So Deb and I will have questions and ideas, and it's been very successful to have brought on a graduate level mentoring component to the program. I think we feel like we're finally at a point where everything's running smoothly. But I've been doing it for 20 years and Deb for that about that amount. The other thing I'll just say is that
14.
the work that's gone on has often led the students to be interacting with the public, which is often good, but then with policymakers where, and I'll just speak for you because it was an interesting moment, in speaking with the City of Worcester and presenting answers to questions that they posed to us. I think they were, to a certain degree, overwhelmed with some of the answers provided. And so that's several years back now. And I think to your comment about policy, I think organizations, we'll just say one is the City of Worcester, can't immediately digest the type of findings we provide. And so but that's slowly starting to, we know now that it's slowly starting to make a difference in terms of how they're deciding to act on the Green Worcester plan. But it's an interesting experience to be there and have the students present all this great work, and it's high level. And then the people on the other side of Zoom are impressed, but also a little bit quiet for our liking. And that's just the way it goes, right? That's the real world. So that was an interesting experience. Deb, do you want to?
Yeah, the only thing I'd say, though, is there's an interesting fact in the back from the comment and question about that Worcester still goes out and hires consultants. There's a tremendous amount of intellectual firepower in this city, not just here at Clark. And the fact that the City of Worcester needs to go hire consultants as opposed to collaborate with the many universities here is a little bit flabbergasting to me. That's probably I shouldn't say that, but I'll say it anyway.
I think you should. But my question that you tickled in my mind was, how do you go about finding out which agency or sub-agency within Worcester you really need to connect with for a particular problem? I mean, with the transportation, I was dealing with the regional transportation planning guys all the time, but they're the whole show. There's no question that they're the ones that want to know the answers to the questions students are working on. But for the kinds of questions you're asking, some of them are quite multi-agency potential. And how do you find out which one to target? When you give your seminar with the results, you want to have the right people in the room. And if they are the right people, they should understand what you're talking about, and they should be able to ask reasonable and intelligent questions that really connect with what the students have done. But I know the students are doing very high level stuff, but one would hope that the people in the agencies in Worcester would be able to absorb it.
Just to clarify, I think they understand it's how to implement, right, and how to digest that and put it into action, right? So we do a lot of work in a short period of time, and I think sometimes that surprises them that this all got done for nothing, no cost, which brings up Deb's point about hiring consultants and stuff. We'd love a bit of that consulting money, I'll be honest with you. Any more questions?
Well, the only other thing I'd
comments,
say
yeah.
about that is John does a tremendous amount of networking, and many people know John in the city, and that helps a lot. And following up from Jim's comment, I give John pretty much all the credit for the good name that Hero has in the city, because he really does a tremendous amount behind the scenes, including watering the trees in Hadwen Arboretum that were planted all along the street, two sides. Yeah.
Do you get them calling you up and asking and saying, could you have the students work on this problem?
Yeah, so the question is, is there outreach to us to say, yeah, could we work with them? So we've recently worked with Groundwork Rhode Island, and they're a non-profit there. They're part of the Groundwork USA group. They're in different cities. And Groundwork Rhode Island reached out to us because they'd heard of the work that we were doing in Massachusetts and the gateway cities. And so we were happy to then go out of Massachusetts and go to the romantic towns in Rhode Island, Pawtucket, Cumberland, Central Falls, and East Providence. And we're learning a lot from going to those places. I don't think I had been in any of those towns before going there last summer. All right, so listen, thanks everybody. Thanks to the panelists for their delivery today and your time. You had a big choice to make, the future of Clark, and so we're all in the dark together. We don't know what the future is like, but Hero probably will find a way to move forward, I bet. So thanks to everybody.